This is Tim Higgins, current president of the In2 Thinking Network, and this is the 2025 forum. I'm introducing Doug Stilwell, who's going to talk about Deming, Ackoff, and Jiu Jitsu. I'm familiar with Deming and Ackoff, not Jiu Jitsu very much, although my wife is Brazilian, she doesn't engage. Doug is a retired educator, 44 years in education, K-12 experience, and 22 of them were leadership roles, including principal and superintendent. In his last couple of years as superintendent, the student achievement was the highest that it has been in 17 years. It's quite an accomplishment. 9 years, he was an assistant professor of education and leadership at Drake, and his areas of expertise include systems thinking, continual improvement, classroom, school, district transformation, and leadership and coaching. So we've got someone who's got experience and got knowledge he's going to share, and as Dr. Deming told us, there's no substitute for knowledge, and Doug has a lot.
Greetings, everyone. I'm coming to you from Urbandale, Iowa. Urbandale is a suburb of Des Moines in central Iowa. As Tim had said, I have experienced 44 years in education, and that included teaching, administration, and then serving as an assistant professor at Drake University here in Des Moines. I've recently retired and glad to have this opportunity because I'm still trying to find things to do with my time. But as long as there's not a whole lot, folks here, maybe you could just introduce yourselves to me and tell me what it is that brings you here to the conference. So I see two of you sitting in the audience, and maybe you could do that for me, please.
Hi, my name is Dennis, and I'm here to learn more about the intersection of effectiveness and efficiency.
Great, thanks.
I'm Jane, and my rationale is pretty much the same. I'm always interested in improving my own personal efficiency and effectivity and that of my clients.
Do we want to go through the 50 online too, Doug? Or the however
Sure,
many we have
I don't see anyone online, but let's do that.
Please, if anyone's online, introduce yourself briefly. Since I'm blind to if anyone's online, I'm not sure.
I'm not sure how they
Doug,
interact.
yeah, you should start with who we got, and if onliners
Right.
come along.
Well, I recall once upon a time back in '96, a teacher and myself, I was a principal at the time, and we put together what we thought was a wonderful presentation for the International Reading Association. We flew down to New Orleans and got ready to present, and there were 4 people in the room. 3 of them were from our school district. So I'm glad at least have a couple people here today, and hopefully we can have a good conversation about this topic. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I will let you know that I am going to be reading from some of the slides. So if you see my eyes glancing up from time to time, you'll know that's what's going on. Okay, so I'm assuming you can see this. It says Deming, Ackoff, and Jiu Jitsu Black Belt walk into a system. Can you see that okay?
Yes.
All right. So we know that's kind of the start of a typical joke, right? Such and such people walk into a bar and something happens. Well, I thought this would be an interesting take. It's not really the start of a real great joke, but it really is meant to catch your attention and maybe even spark some breakthroughs in our thinking today. So we will get back to the Deming, Ackoff, and a Jiu Jitsu Black Belt walk into a system later at the end of our presentation. And I needed to add that because all bad jokes need a rim shot, and I'm a former 6th grade teacher, so I really wanted to include that. So it was mentioned about this notion of effectiveness and efficiency. That's really kind of the overall theme of the conference. And beyond the initial slide that talked about the gentleman walking into the system, this is about exploring performance improvement. It's through my personal experience of cognitive blending. Now, I don't mean to insult anybody, but if you're not familiar with it, cognitive blending is what happens in your mind when you take two or more familiar ideas and blend them into something new, something you hadn't thought about before. Cognitive blending can explain how metaphors shape our understanding, how creativity works, and how leaders synthesize ideas across multiple disciplines. This type of thinking is really the heart of innovation, seeing something as something else to create a new, often more powerful way of thinking. Let me give you some examples. Our good friend Albert Einstein, his theory of relativity combined physics and imagination. If you remember, Einstein imagined what it would be like to be riding on a beam of light. And by blending physics along with that visual thinking, he changed how we understand time and space. Another example would be servant leadership. That's blending business and philosophy. So I think about people like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who blended his moral courage with a strategy. And in the business side of it, we can think about Herb Kelleher from Southwest Airlines, who led by putting people first and blending empathy with his business smarts. More specific to our conversation today, I think about Dr. Deming. He blended systems, statistics, psychology, epistemology, and leadership to really revolutionize how we think about improvement. And of course, Dr. Russell Ackoff, he blended systems thinking, design, and deep philosophy to change how we look at and solve problems. So this bringing this all together is how I came up with this topic for today, using this notion of cognitive blending. And really, one of the great ways that we learn is through asking questions. And that was one of the guiding pieces for this conference is leading with questions. And what that does, it invites ownership and it transforms experiences, including leadership, from controlling the outcome to cultivating insight and shared responsibility. So today I'm hoping that we'll gain some new insights both for you and for me. There are really two types of questions, basically, closed and open questions. Closed questions seek a specific answer to a specific problem, often answered with yes, no, or some fact. But today, I want us to focus on open-ended questions, the kind that don't just look for answers, but the kind that invite us to do more deep thinking, to challenge our assumptions, and to change our perspective. So the question behind this all for me, and this reminded me of those days of doctoral work when I had to come up with a guiding question for my dissertation. But the question that kind of guides this work is right in front of you. How might jujitsu, systems thinking, and effectiveness impact performance improvement? And what do they have in common? Because my goodness, they sure seem like they don't have much in common. So it really started with a friend of mine, actually a relative of mine, who is a black belt in jiu-jitsu and also a jiu-jitsu coach. And I had the opportunity several times to watch him during his coaching sessions. And one thing that really made me curious was how did he advance his students from one color belt to another? So this really wasn't looking initially at leadership or performance at the time, but that question came to my mind, and I had long conversations with this relative. He asked to remain anonymous, um, and he talked about how he looks at progress, development, and readiness. And he said, "I don't use checklists. I don't use rigid timelines, but through observing patterns of behavior." Patterns of students' responsiveness and the flow of their work. And as he said that, I immediately thought, my gosh, that sounds like something Dr. Deming or Dr. Ackoff would talk about. With those ideas about systems, purpose, interaction, they echoed in my mind, and that connection of cognitive blending was made. So when I think about the value of cognitive blending again, this really hit me. When two related ideas about performance evaluation, like martial arts and Deming and Ackoff. When they collide, it created a space for me for new understanding. And it wasn't just about novelty for novelty's sake, although sometimes I enjoy that and I appreciate that. But it's really about breaking out of our silos of our thinking so that we can see the systems that we're in more clearly. We can blend disciplines together and we can start asking better questions, often uncovering truths that were hidden in plain sight. So let's talk a little bit about Jiu-Jitsu. Now, what I really know about Jiu-Jitsu could be written on the end of this eraser that I'm looking at here on the tip of my pencil. But just a very brief background. Jiu-Jitsu is one of several martial arts. It teaches you how to defend yourself using technique and leverage. And think about leverage in systems for a moment. Systems need leverage to get moving. But it uses technique and leverage instead of strength. And it's not that strength isn't important, but it's really about leverage and the technique. It's like learning how to stay calm in tough situations and how to use your opponent's energy against them. You solve problems with strategy instead of force. You might think of it metaphorically as playing a game of chess where patience, timing, and position matter more than power. Historically, classical jiu-jitsu was developed by the samurai in the 1500s. And most recently, and where it's really become, I believe, more popular, particularly in the United States, is Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, which came about in the early 1900s. So, some things about Jiu Jitsu, some concepts that are also related to leadership. And believe me, we will get to evaluation, performance evaluation moment, but I wanted to give this background. So jiu-jitsu relies on leverage over strength. And leverage is a concept that applies directly to systems thinking. Dr. Peter Senge often talked about this idea of having leverage, finding leverage in a system and using it to improve the system. Jiu-jitsu is about adaptability. Great leaders not only have strategy, but they learn to lead the room and adjust in real time. We know that progress really happens through practice, and that applies to leadership. We grow in our leadership through daily habits and daily reflection. Jiu-jitsu relies on pressure and control, and that means applying steady guidance, not micromanaging. And I found that in my friend's coaching. He didn't micromanage. He offered really steady guidance to his students. And we think about getting position before submission. And that sounds kind of archaic, but it really means in leadership, how do we build trust and clarity before we move to make some big changes in our organizations? Jiu-jitsu stresses defense first. And in leadership, that means, in my mind, you protect your team and their morale and their well-being before taking any steps. And humility, own your mistakes. Real growth starts with vulnerability, and that's a topic that Brene Brown has written a great deal about. So I'm going to take a moment here and test your jujitsu acumen thus far. And since we have two folks in the room, I'll ask you to participate in that if you would, please. So when you feel resistance, maybe it's organizational resistance, maybe it's resistance in a relationship, maybe it's even physical resistance. What's your default move? In other words, when you first feel that, what is your default move? What's your go-to? Here's some opportunities that may sound familiar. One option may be to push harder. One may be to pause and assess what's going on before you take any action. Another option is to avoid it altogether. Another option might be to redirect the energy. And there might be others, but I would ask the two of you sitting in the room if you wouldn't mind scooting a little bit closer together or talking to each other and talk to each other for just a couple of minutes. And this would go for anyone if you're online to write comments or if you can visit with other people. I don't know if you can. But what's your go-to? So I'll let you two here in the front row talk about that for just a moment, then I'll ask you to share out. And Tim, I might also ask you that same question as well.
I typically find myself following something I read in the sixties in college from Marshall McLuhan. The way to deal with a bureaucracy is ignore it. Just go on about your business and they're doing whatever they're doing. That's what I did in the school. I did what I wanted and ignored them.
And look at, here's,
And now I'm not a teacher anymore, but I'm doing very well.
All right, how about the other two folks? What'd you come up?
we came up with, you could push harder or pause and assess.
Okay. Yeah, and it's not uncommon. We all experience resistance somewhere. I would offer for consideration, if you've never experienced resistance, then you've really never tried to accomplish anything. Because with any type of effort, there's always some sort of resistance. So here's what I think a jujitsu master would lean towards relative to these choices. I think a jujitsu master would pause and assess. And of course, if you're in a jujitsu match, you don't have a lot of time, but you are constantly thinking and or redirect the energy. And that's a key concept of jujitsu is using the opponent's strength or momentum against them. Or put a different way, brute force is for beginners and furniture movers, not for systems leaders and not for people who want to make significant changes and improvements. So here's some wisdom from the mat that I gained by interviewing my friend, my relative. As I watched him and as we talked, he shared that teaching and evaluation go hand in hand. What you observe on the mat is what should shape what you teach next, not what you think you need to teach before you see it, but you're focusing on getting feedback and assessing before you teach or before you help someone improve. Secondly, you act in the moment. Immediate feedback is much more important in real world applications than it is delayed critique. If you've done something that needs correction and someone tells you about it a month later, it's not going to have much effect because you've probably already forgotten the situation. Another concept is that growth lives in challenge. Our progress doesn't happen in our comfort zones. We've heard that term, right? We've heard that term more than we'd like to say. Get out of your comfort zone. Get out of your comfort zone. Productive struggle sharpens both skills and your mindset. More wisdom from the mat, leading from within. Improvement begins with presence. Great coaches and great leaders train alongside their people. I saw this when I observed the jiu-jitsu training, and the coach would oftentimes speak, but sometimes he would need to get on the floor, on the mat, and roll, what they call roll with the students to teach them specific skills and to give them specific feedback. It also got them into the trenches as well. I also learned from the coach that clarity fuels growth, that he does not use vague goals. They have very specific goals that they're working for. So specificity about what success looks like and how to reach it is important for growth. And even in large organizations, I would offer that we need to coach the individual. Yep, sometimes we have to talk to the large group, but sometimes the individual. And a one-size approach doesn't always work. People are different. Dr. Deming talks about variation. People have different needs. People are in different contexts. The same people in different contexts requires different feedback. So the feedback that we give to help people improve comes from personal and very targeted feedback about the situation in which they're working. So here's some more jiu-jitsu practice for us today. Let's say you're in some kind of a setting and you propose something new and someone responds, and we've probably experienced this before. This will never work here. That's pressure. That's pressure against you. That's resistance. So when someone says something like that, what might be some ideas of things you could say, not to overpower that person, but to actually shift the momentum in your favor? And I'll give you a few moments with your partner there to talk about that one again, and maybe talk about when you've experienced it and maybe some things that you've said, and then I'll offer some ideas as well. So let me give you a couple of minutes to talk amongst each other.
I'm familiar with a technique that I got from De Bono, Edward De Bono. He's got 6 thinking hats, and all the colors represent a kind of thinking. And the hat we use the most is the black hat. You know, whatever an idea comes up, this is what's wrong with it. So if you can take somebody and they say, this is what's wrong with it, you can ask them, tell me more about what's wrong. Then you say, okay, we've examined what's wrong. Tell me what's good about this.
Right. So you've accepted that feedback, you've acknowledged it, then you look at it from a new perspective. Thanks. Others out in the audience?
Dennis has got something.
Yeah, you can tie that in with the classic 5 whys. So start the process, and then the momentum shifts when you get the person through it, as opposed to focusing on just their initial reaction.
Tim, could you say that for me again? I couldn't hear very well. Tim, can you clarify what Dennis just said? I couldn't hear very well.
Oh, just how can we use the 5 whys to help shift the momentum and get people to move off of their initial position?
Yeah, that's nice. That's a way to get to root cause analysis. Thanks, Dennis. Jane?
Change the perspective, look at it from a different angle, a different functional angle, you know, instead of focusing maybe on the financial part, look at a different part of that, you know, the quality part, or instead of focusing on the quality, look at the finance or the operational piece, or even go back to the design. Just take a different tack.
Yeah. I'm just curious, of the 3 of you that are participating here, have you ever experienced that resistance? You've offered an idea and someone said, that'll never work here, or we've tried that before?
All the time.
Daily.
I've tried that at my home a few times, and I get that resistance from my wife, and I really haven't had a good answer for that. So maybe some places it doesn't work. Here's some other ideas that I'm sorry.
There is yes, dear.
Yeah, that's right. Here's some other ways to think about it. We can reframe the resistance. We could say something like, that's interesting. Can you help me understand what makes you feel that way? That invites dialogue and helps to uncover those people's assumptions. You can acknowledge what they've said. You can say, yeah, I get what you're saying. We've all seen ideas flop, but what if we tried a small version first, just to test and learn? That would open the door to some experimentation. We can also anchor our response in a shared purpose. You might say something like, well, that's fair enough, but can we agree that the goal, whatever the goal might be, still matters, and maybe we can find a different path that fits us better? And modeling curiosity, not conviction. Staying away from defensiveness. Dr. Senge talked a lot about defensive routines and how they prevent learning. But if we can be curious, so you might say, that's a fair concern. What do you think? What else do you think would work here? And finally, you could use a systems lens. You could say that response is part of the system speaking back. What's that person trying to protect, and what might it need in order to change? So there's multiple ways we can get at that. Again, trying to take some concepts from jiu-jitsu and apply them to our leadership roles. So where divergent paths converge, when I think about Dr. Deming's work, and I was telling Tim earlier, I was first exposed to Dr. Deming's work in 1992 during my graduate work. I read a paper of his, and I thought, well, that's neat, and I put it away. And I was introduced into systems work first through Dr. Peter Senge, and then in 2009 to Dr. Deming. Um, so I've learned a great deal in the 16 years I've been studying his work and also Dr. Ackoff's. But here's where those paths converge. We focus on understanding systems, not forcing outcomes. A jiu-jitsu fighter will look at the system that he or she is in at the moment, and instead of forcing something, find the best way, find the best leverage point to make a difference. That progress comes from our timing, being aware, and the flow of what's happening in the organization. And Dr. Deming, as I recall, created a very nice flow diagram for an entire organization. And trying to avoid reliance on brute strength or control. I've seen videos, I hate to say this, but I do watch YouTube videos in the evening, and I've seen some people, some larger, stronger looking people take on, with no jujitsu experience, take on smaller jujitsu experts. And every single time, the person with the jujitsu expertise controls the brute force. It also makes me think about something we think about in leadership. And I'll just talk about my own roles as a principal and a superintendent. My uncle shared this with me once, and it stuck. It's a good lesson is as a principal or superintendent, you have a lot of positional power. Use it as infrequently as possible. And that's also exactly what Dr. Deming said. He said, don't use your positional power, use your personal power. And finally, leverage insight over intensity. Understand what's happening. Put forth an effort, but make sure it's the right effort. Um, we might agree, I believe this, that your best effort or your highest effort doesn't guarantee a high impact, particularly when we, as Dr. Ackoff has said before, are attempting to do the wrong things righter. What matters more is seeing clearly what matters now and what's causing the problem and what change could shift the system. Insight, really, insight, understanding systems is the lever that moves things, not more effort, but I would say better effort.
That's it, Doug. That's interesting. In Donella Meadows' book, I think it's Systems Thinking, a Primer. She has a chapter with, I believe it's 12 ways to intervene in the system. And the one that she says is most effective is change the paradigm.
Yeah, yeah. I think I heard Dennis say something about that earlier as well, using the 5 whys as a strategy for that. So what I found, this is what led me on this path, that in jujitsu, there are no rubrics the coach uses, there are no tests, and there's no official scoring. That makes me think back to my own teaching career when we give evaluations, when we understand what people are doing. We do use rubrics. In fact, we're almost rubric to death in my mind. We give tests all the time in education and we score things, right? We've got to give somehow that numerical score supposedly means something to someone. That doesn't happen in jiu-jitsu. The evaluation happens in real time, whether the coach is watching the students doing their moves or whether he is on the ground rolling with them. He's evaluating in the moment and giving feedback in the moment. The growth is felt not only by the student, right? They feel themselves growing. It's not someone telling them they're growing, but they feel that growth. It's not something the coach is checking off in a box. And this is the one that struck me the most. Promotions are determined solely by the coach's expertise. And I thought, wow, that would not go over well in public education. We have to have 18,000 different assessments to prove what we already know. So the coach's judgment is is the most important part of that evaluation. And again, there's no checklist. Here's what they're looking for. That person's technical ability, their timing and control when they're in full conflict with someone, how they're able to problem solve under pressure. In other words, if someone's got me in some kind of an arm bar, how do I get out of it? He looks to see whether or not his students want to be good learners, whether or not they have an attitude of humility, and also whether the students are willing to be part of a larger system and part of, in other words, part of the whole group and helping to teach and guide others as they see fit, particularly if someone has a higher belt level than someone else. I just thought this was the part that really fascinated me. And I thought, what a wonderful way to assess. What a wonderful way to help people improve. So finally, some final lessons from the mat. In Jiu Jitsu, you don't meet force with force, you redirect the force. In systems leadership, improvement comes from timing, awareness, and alignment, not control. And that same thing is true in Jiu Jitsu. And the big takeaway, like a Jiu Jitsu black belt, great leaders don't react to force. They use timing and awareness to respond with leverage and impact. So in Jiu Jitsu, success is not about overpowering. I would offer that's the same thing in leadership. It's about timing, it's about leverage, it's about the flow. And the same thing holds true again in leadership and also performance evaluation. We cannot force people or systems to change. We know that old saying that no one minds change, but no one wants to be changed. What we do is we work with people. As Tim said, we help to change paradigms. We work with them. We get in the trenches with them. Improvement lies in our awareness, not in our control. Well, now that our jiu-jitsu lesson is complete, let's talk about performance evaluation. So first of all, what's wrong with traditional performance evaluation? Well, it creates anxiety and distrust. It can stifle someone's initiative. If I only know that I just need to hit this certain mark, I may not show enough initiative to go beyond that. It shifts the purpose, it shifts the focus from having a purpose to actual performance. Now, the performance is important, but it needs to be aligned with the purpose. It can lead to burnout and cynicism. Keeping with the theme of this workshop, it is efficient. It's extremely efficient, but it's not particularly effective. And in fact, Dr. Deming in the book, The New Economics, cites this as one of the forces of destruction. Here's what some research says about performance evaluation. From the corporate executive board, as cited in the Harvard Business Review, 66% of employees reported dissatisfaction with their performance evaluations. Same source, 95% of managers were dissatisfied with their organization's evaluation process. So both sides were not happy with what happened. The Gallup poll indicated that only 14% of employees strongly agreed that performance reviews inspired them to improve. And back to the Harvard Business Review, traditional evaluation systems can reduce motivation and performance, especially when perceived as unfair or disconnected from the real work. So I was going to use a little technology here, but given the number of people, oh gosh, I'm sorry. I want to share my experiences. I have been evaluated and I also have been an evaluator. I can say from my experience of being evaluated when I was a teacher, nothing that was ever given to me as feedback helped me to get better. The same thing when I was a principal. No feedback from my supervisors helped me to get better. And I will tell you, the least effective and the most worthless feedback I received was from my school board as a superintendent. They didn't help me one bit. Now, on the other side of that, I've asked probably all of my students when I was teaching at Drake, so that would include over the years probably over 300 students. Raise your hand if your evaluation system has helped you to improve as a teacher. And I would have to say that there's 1% or less of the students that ever raised their hand that said it was worthwhile. And the ironic part about that is they were then getting ready to move into one of our courses that taught them how to evaluate teachers. And in my cynical mind, when I tell people now I'm getting old and cranky so I can say these things, they're going to go into that class and they're going to learn how to do the wrong things better. Um, Principals and superintendents are trained over and over again in quote the best evaluation performance practices. And I can tell you in Iowa what the results have been. We look at 30 years of ACT data, and in the state of Iowa, for the first 25 years, we saw flat results. And for the past 5 or 6 years, we've seen declining results. Now, one would think that if we had effective performance evaluation systems focused on improvement, that we would see improvement in student results, but we haven't seen it. This is what I was going to ask you to use some technology, but I'm just going to ask you, I guess we have three people in the room. What have been your experiences with being evaluated, and have they helped you to improve? So if you wouldn't mind sharing, Tim or Dennis or Jane.
I've never found a lot of value in it. It's not specific enough to help, and it's more of a sentiment that I like this person, they're doing a good job, or I really don't like the job they're doing, kind of thing, whether it's as a teacher or as an employee. And as a manager in corporate America for many years, I hated giving performance. I don't like giving.
Can you tell me why, Jane?
Why?
Yeah.
Because it's a perfunctory kind of exercise. It's check these boxes and you have to do this, you know, 2 people have to get, or X percent has to get high marks and X percent has to get low marks, and then everybody else falls in the middle. So you can't say, hey, I worked my tail off to get a high performing team and everybody should get A's. Because they don't like that in the corporate world, and they don't like that in school either. So it's really a no-win and thankless part of the job.
It isn't, Jane, as you said that, and it's Jane, correct? I have your name correct?
Jane, Jane. Yes.
Okay, thank you. It sounds like in both situations you talked about, whether it's school or the corporate world, it's almost a bell curve that someone's going to do really well, a lot are going to fall in the middle, and by default, someone has to fail. Is that fair?
That's usually the guidelines I've been given. Yes.
At the same time, the parents and a lot of people believe everybody should be above average.
Well, that happens in Lake Wobegon.
That's what I was going to say, Lake Wobegon.
Dennis, how about you?
So I would say I've had a mixed review. I'd say a third of them I've been involved with Asian organizations, and they view these type of as a development exercise. So how they review people is much different than here in the Western. So I had good experiences there. I've had good experiences with entrepreneurial companies because they have to figure things out and grow with what they have. Otherwise, they're going to die very quickly. I've worked with half dozen Fortune 500 companies, and those are the worst because they're mature organizations and they're very hierarchical, and HR doesn't know what they're doing. So I've had a mixed bag.
I chuckled because I was in HR for a while, and I agree completely. Tim, how about you?
Well, I did a little challenge of the system. The first time they did a performance review when I was in industry, I sat down with somebody and we developed some goals for the next year. I can't remember, it was 3 or 5, but whatever they were, we developed them, agreed to them, went away, and then the next year we come back and reviewed them, and yes, you accomplished all these and everything's okay. And I was thinking about all this and saying, what the heck? There are 5 things. If those are the only 5 things I did all year, they'd fire me. This is crazy. And
Yeah.
then then right after that meeting, a week later or so, we're going to make the goals for the following year. So I purposely made goals that I couldn't possibly accomplish without the help of others. And then with the goals, I agreed with him. The following year, when he came to evaluate me, he looked at the first one and he said, "Well, this goal wasn't met." I said, "Yeah, I know. We tried. We were doing our best." And he said, "Well, but it wasn't your fault." And I said, "Well, yeah, I know." Same thing on the second one. And before he looked at the third one, he says, "This next time, for the next year, you have to develop goals that only you are responsible for accomplishing." And I told him, "I can't think of a damn thing that I do by myself."
Well, that's
His
right.
solution was he quit evaluating me after that.
So you used a little jujitsu on him. You used a little leverage on him to get him out of that.
I got my promotions and
Well, that makes me think of Dr. Deming. You know, he talks about when we're evaluating people, we're really evaluating the system. And what we should be about is actually helping people to improve. So as you might imagine, I think all 3 of us, 4 of us here, I've never been a big fan of the traditional performance evaluation. The gentleman at Drake that taught the course, and he taught it really well. And I had to bite my tongue and not say, but you're teaching them the wrong things. You're not teaching them how to help people improve. So I learned to bite my tongue on that one. But we've all had those experiences. And that's when I think back to the whole jujitsu thing and how much more effective that was. It wasn't more efficient, but it was more effective. So I don't know if any, yep,
I have a question before you move on. So,
yes.
in education, I've been evaluating people for 35 years in education, teaching. And what worked best was pass fail. And then working with individuals, at their pace. Tell me what you think about pass fail and why that can't be, or it's not being adopted by education.
I adopted an idea that I learned from David Langford, and that was everyone in class is going to get an A, and I'm going to give you relentless help until you get an A. So in my class, it was basically pass fail, and it was pretty dang hard for someone to fail. So I think that's a fantastic idea. The reason it won't work in education, I shouldn't say it won't work. Um, there's probably multiple reasons. One is most educators don't have what Dr. Deming would call profound knowledge. Um, I use this term also that we continue to wash dishes in dirty water. That's the way we've always done it, and that is a tough one to get by. There's probably more reasons than that, but those are my 2 reasons that it probably won't. People just don't look at the system in a different way, and um, they like comfort. No one really likes to change that much, even when they're not getting better results, which is something that's amazing to me. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, one way.
I thought I would share that I got my MBA in a pass-fail program. All classes were, I never got a grade. And I even asked for a transcript from the university, and my grade point average is 0.0. I just get a big kick out of
Can
that.
I ask what school that was?
Fordham University in New York City, it was the Deming Scholars MBA program. So it was set up with Deming's philosophy in mind.
Yeah.
And I taught, now Presidio in San Francisco, that's how they do it.
Now, if you've never been through one of those programs, there were a few courses I failed. And I went into the professor and said, I need to demonstrate I have knowledge of the subject matter. This was not the way to do it. And the reason was because I'm an engineer and I spell like an engineer. And she graded me on my spelling, which was too damn bad. So I had to demonstrate. So we came up with an agreement on another way that I could demonstrate it. And she was perfectly happy with it. So she passed me. You know, and that's all I had to do was just get some level of convey the knowledge that I understood the knowledge I was trying to say.
But I think a big difference is pass fail versus giving everyone away. Everyone an A. There is a difference.
There is a
from
big
pass fail and then everyone gets. I think there's a big difference.
Yes, I agree.
But what David does, which is really clever, is he has the students and he work with what the district says. In order to be competent in this subject, here's what you have to demonstrate. And they set up goals, and he helps each kid get through what that says, and then he doesn't have to worry about, everybody can get an A, and then when they challenge him on that, he says, here's what you said are the requirements, here's how it was demonstrated, what grade would you want?
The problem with that, what I've seen is the means that you get there. It's a classic sales.
Yeah.
At the end of a quarter, you have to get a certain amount
Yeah.
to sell. Well, we're gonna just
Yeah.
push you through to make sure you get the means.
Yeah,
Can be
exactly,
a problem in that situation.
exactly.
And if you have too many students, that can be a real challenge too.
20-some, 30-some
Yep.
students, you can't give them that
But
independence.
boy, they can help each other.
If
At
Yep, they're already-
CSUN, they put 60 kids in one class,
60,
and I have an auditorium class, and they put 100 in.
oh man,
There's no way you can do that one-to-one.
wow.
It's too many students, you know?
I will
So there's
say-
another example of how that's another example of how the system is not set up to give us the results that we want.
Exactly.
I was lucky enough in my work at Drake to only have anywhere between 15 and 20 students, so a much different ball game. But I think we're all talking about the same thing. We're talking about demonstrating through performance, competence. And was that Dave back there? Is that who chimed in about the masters?
Yeah,
Yeah. Dave, did you feel like you learned a great deal through that methodology and that quote grading system?
Come to the back of the room someplace. I learned a whole lot. There were some strange behaviors that occurred because it was 8 people. We would have the professors come to us, so it was the same 8 students all the time.
Okay.
And pretty soon we realized that the professor was lecturing on a specific topic, and we would start talking across the table to ourselves and incorporating that into other professors' lessons. So it became enlightening for the professor just to watch how people, and these are not 23-year-old kids. We were all in our near 30, on both sides of 30, with industry experience. How we ingested it and how we developed it and how we made the connections that went back and forth. So yeah, there was a tremendous amount of learning. The only thing that in the program I went through that was disheartening or not very easy to understand was we were paying $60,000 for an MBA program, and we had no way to judge if we were going to graduate in 18 months.
Hmm.
And that was hard.
Yeah.
Because we trained to follow the grades. Every grade, every semester, they'd say you pass on.
Yeah.
And the program kept saying, don't worry about it, you're passing, you're fine, everybody's fine. So
Trust.
it was trust.
Yeah, it's okay if they say pass at the end.
Well, it's amazing how much of it when you're, well, myself, I was spending my retirement money to go. See, comes down to money. See, all what I had saved for retirement, or 401k, I was spending. And if I wasn't gonna get something at the end, even if it was, an empty, almost worthless,
You should be there to learn, have
Well,
fun.
it makes a difference. I have,
But then I have to go back out into the real world with the other people that don't think that way.
at the University of Santa Clara, I was taking the third semester of calculus. The first two were taught by engineers and sort of related to the real world to me. The third one was taught by a math guy, and it was math for the sake of math, and I didn't have a clue what was going on. There were only 8 people in the class. It was an early morning class. I'm not good real early in the morning anyway. And 6 weeks into the class, it's clear I'm going to fail this class if one of the other guys, Gary, who lives down the hall, drops from the class. So I was debating whether I should drop, because Gary didn't even bother to go to class, and he was doing maybe a little better than me. And I said, Gary, are you going to drop math? No, I can't. I need it for my major. I said, are you sure you're not going to drop math? He said, yes, I'm sure. So I stayed in the class, and my theory was with 8 people, there'd be 1A, 1F. I would be the F if Gary left, but if Gary stayed, I would be the D and he would be the F. So I got through on my D and moved on, and Gary took the class again.
Well, it sounds like we're all fairly simpatico about what we think about evaluation for performance improvement and in our own different experiences. But it sure does take a lot of time for people to go through those with maybe little results at the end. I'm always reminded, I don't know if any of you saw the movie Back to the Future. Gosh, it was like 1986 that it came out. And there was this one particular scene early on in the movie when the Marty character meets Doc Brown back in 1955. And Doc Brown, as you can see, has this really goofy looking device on his head. He connects it to he's never met Marty before, so he connects it to Marty's head with using a suction cup, and he tries to start reading Marty's mind. And he asks Marty all these questions like, are you this, are you that? And every single answer was no, 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 no. And Marty finally says, Doc, I'm here from the future in a machine that you built. And Doc Brown pauses and said, my God, do you know what this means? This means this damn thing doesn't work at all. And I think about that with evaluation, the way that we do it, it doesn't work. And yet we continue to do it over and over and over again. Typical evaluations record, but they don't really reveal anything. And when they fail, which I would say they often do, they don't give us any insight. We still feel frustrated where we're the ones being evaluated or whether we're the ones doing the evaluations. So what they can all teach us. Dr. Deming taught us about the system of profound knowledge and how that required cognitive blending for all those pieces to work together. It's a lens through which we do our work, as you probably all know since you're sitting here. Dr. Ackoff asks, among other things, a simple but profound question as to whether or not we're doing the right things. He tells us to stop doing the wrong things righter. And the black belt teaches us about leadership through engagement and presence and practice. So this cognitive blending brings all of these together. And again, for me, the jiu-jitsu was so helpful in seeing there is a different way that we can evaluate, or I'm sorry, not evaluate, but help people improve. So here's what better coaching, what better could look like. And again, I'm probably telling you nothing you don't know. We're coaching, we're not judging. We're not intended to be judges. Dr. Deming says a leader's role is to help people improve, not to rank or sort them. It needs to be done in real time, not in multiple episodes over time. It needs to be rooted in the context of what people are actually doing, not an isolated piece. Like Tim, when you were talking about these things that they didn't want you connected, your goals connected to other people doing the work. Well, that was the real work that you did. So what they were trying to do was to evaluate you in isolation. And finally, sometimes it requires us to get on the mat. I know as a principal, one of the things teachers would often ask is, can you come to the classroom and teach with me? Sometimes you do that. Sometimes you have to get back in on the mat to work with people, to see what it's like again, and to give feedback from that perspective. So those are just four of my thoughts about what better performance evaluation could look like. So I call this the gentle art of leadership. Influence doesn't come from our position. It comes from our presence. You know, when people, and this is true of me, when I think someone is with me, not above me, I behave differently, and I think others do too. People will take risks, and taking risks, they'll grow. And that kind of influence can't really be achieved through checklists or faked at all. It's earned almost moment by moment. Jiu-jitsu is a subtle shift um, in which you can move opponents twice your size. And the same goes for leadership. A well-placed question can unlock change. You know, we're not here to force people. We're here to move with them to help them improve. That is the art of it. And we do learn that effectiveness is superior to efficiency in this regard. So back to where we started. Deming, Ackoff, and a jiu-jitsu black belt walk into a system. Dr. Deming maps the system. Dr. Ackoff determines whether the parts are working together. The black belt applies the appropriate leverage on the system. The system taps out and then asks for coaching. So I thank you. Thank you for being a part of this presentation today. Let me see if I can stop sharing somehow. There we go. I appreciate the robust conversation, the honest conversation, and just through our time here today, I learned some things as well. So I want to thank the Institute for allowing me to speak today and to get to know a few of you here during our time. Any other questions there before we depart? Bill said we had an extra 15 minutes, but I don't think that's going to happen.
Thank you, Doug. One of the things I thought was really intriguing is presence. I hadn't thought much about that. But the idea of it, and it fits in with both Deming and Dr. Ackoff, that presence is very important. Being right there, being somebody who is present but is not trying to dominate or control or force. Thanks for that.
I think that's saying a whole book about presence. So a question that I have for you is, these are nice things to talk about, but current sets of behavior of leadership, leadership doesn't take these into effect. What can you do? These are nice, understand, yeah, we all think, yeah, we should do these, but how do we get leadership to actually adopt these? Because we've been trying for 100 years and they haven't done it. We've been trying, Deming's been doing it in the 80s, they haven't done it. What do you think they have to do to adopt these from a leadership perspective?
Yeah, first comment I'll make is sometimes I can be really critical. As I said, as I'm getting older and more cranky, I get critical of folks who don't do that sort of thing. And then I remember what Dr. Deming says. How could they know? They don't know any different. So the first part is education, and right, there's no global, this is going to fix it all. But I will tell you through our work at Drake University, my colleague Randy Peters and I made sure that we embedded Dr. Deming's teachings into every single class that we taught. And so by giving people a new perspective, we're hoping that we can at least start to change in some situations the way people are evaluating. Now, in all honesty, if someone says, wow, I really align with that, I really agree with that, but if they get into a system that doesn't, they usually acquiesce to what the system wants. So I wish there was a simple answer, Dennis, you know as well as I do, there's not, but I think it comes through education and modeling. I think that's about the way we can go about it.
Yeah, I agree, because if we take one of your graduates from Drake and they come out here to the Los Angeles, and they're in a system with all the leadership has, you know, privilege, and, you know, that person that comes is going to have to adopt, because otherwise they're going to be spit out. And so education isn't enough. What else do we have to do besides education? Because you educate this one person, and the system will just eat them up and spit them out.
Yeah, well, I wish I had the answer to that, because I will tell you a frustration my colleague and I have is that we would have people go through our program, and then when we would go observe them, actually when they had jobs, they weren't doing what we talked about. And I was pretty angry about that. We came to the conclusion, well, are they going to listen to what my professors taught me at Drake, or are they going to listen to the people who are paying my salary? And I don't know, but I know one thing, Dennis. I'm not going to give up. I'm not giving up. I'm going to keep plodding and doing my part, I think, as everyone does. And at least I can say when I go to my grave, which hopefully is not for a long time, that I gave it my best effort.
I say the same thing. I mean, that it took a long time for these businesses to get this kind of mindset, and they have a track record, and this is the way we've done it. This is the way we've been successful. So unless a lot of them implode and need to do something different, which might be happening today, you know, that might be part of what's going on in the world, because companies, there's so much volatility and so much crap going on.
I would push back on that. You had the dot-com bust in 2001. Everyone kept doing the same thing. At 2008, the financial crash, everyone kept doing it. You had COVID in 2020. Keep doing it. You have these shocks, but leadership doesn't change.
How could they know?
Right?
Yeah.
Well, exactly. So how do the system change if the shocks don't change?
I think it has
Hey,
to be a combination.
Tim, could you move a little bit to your right, please? I can't see Jane. To your right.
Me?
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, that's the question. How would they know? And I guess we just keep plugging and teaching. I guess I've become a realist to think I'm not going to change the world. But if we even get one or two, and Jane, I think you put it really well. I think about our students that come through our program. They were indoctrinated into a system for 13 years in public education. And honestly, when they went to undergraduate, their undergraduate experience wasn't much different than mine was 40 plus years ago. So we have to undo how many years? And ours is a 2-year program. We do our best, but boy, we just need more time. And I don't know. But when I see glimpses of it, it's exciting.
I'll tell you something that happened just a few weeks ago. I was at a conference. The guy was talking about creating I'm going to call it a consortium. Sometimes they call it a geographic field of interest. I don't know, something. Up in Montana, Bozeman, Montana. And they have Montana State University there. He's involved with making a center a community that will make photonic chips. They have now gone beyond electronic transistors to the photonic. They're using photons. And he's trying to set up a community that will support a photonic chip manufacturing environment that also goes with quantum. And so I contacted him and said, why don't you, I met him in the hallway, that's what I did. And I said, have you talked to the local university, the deans, to try to get them on board? He says, oh, I've tried that. No, all they're doing is teaching the past. They don't want to teach the future. And he turned around and off he went.
There's a very pessimistic anecdote. I haven't been able to confirm it with anybody, but Dr. Deming was confronted with that question a lot, and he was talking to some folks who were struggling, and he said, Dr. Deming, the executives just aren't getting it. The people are getting it. They know what's going on, but we're just not making that. And Deming's idea was, you got to keep working on the individuals. The organization isn't going to change until somebody at the top changes. But if you can get somebody that's learned this and is willing to try to put it into effect to be elevated to the top, then you got a chance for the organization to transform. And so he told them that and said, sometimes you just have to wait for people to die.
So again, a pushback with that, the hierarchy system is not going to wait. I mean, and, you know, so getting back to what you were saying, is the Deming approach teaching the past, or are we teaching the future of how to change the system? And I don't know if we're doing the future enough. If not, we're here learning about the past. So is the Deming Institute and the Deming thinking, are we doing enough to change the future?
What's interesting is one of the huge drawbacks on changing the system and the hierarchy, as you call it, is the SEC is hierarchical, and you have to do a whole bunch of things that are absolutely wrong. Yeah. You can't have a company unless you do that. That's really troublesome.
So what do we need to do from the Deming to teach more of the future?
Individually, what he was saying before, and sometimes there are people that will stand in the way of or will create a team and stand in the way from the rest of the hierarchical organization influencing what they're doing. And those are the type of people we need to encourage more of. And the ones I've seen have paid a big price. Several of them got fired, but that's if you don't get fired, that means you're not doing it. I'm trying to change it.
What do you think, Doug?
About which part?
Teaching to get the Deming group to move the future, is it only by individuals, or is there anything else we can do?
Can you give them the microphone, Tim? I couldn't hear that very well.
So the group here is saying that the only way we can change is change one person at a time. That's what Deming said. And I'm challenging that and saying that's not working. Is there anything else we can do besides changing one person at a time and hoping that they get up to the top, hoping that that the system can change, hoping. Is there anything else we can do?
Well, if I told you that,
Debbie Downer here.
if I shared that with you, I wouldn't be able to write my book, would I?
You got me there. I'll be, as long as you sign it, I'll buy it.
We're sitting in a Christian church, and an interesting thing about that is they change religion one person at a time.
We get those sparks where people actually see the value, and then it will build on. It's going to take some time.
That's the
what you hope is that through events like this, through programs like we're talking about, that people meet like-minded people and will work with them within a company, because that's where you'll get some of the change.
We don't have time.
We don't. That's all we have. I mean,
The world
is a mess.
and it's going to get messier, and we don't have the time.
Okay, let's close this down. I think it was 11:30 we're supposed to be done.
You'll get 15 more minutes.
Okay, a couple more minutes then, fine, I'm sorry, I'm being the gatekeeper.
I mean, something needs to change. The worse it gets, the more people realize things need to change. And so that sets the opportunity for some of these sparks to take hold and start little fires burning to actually make bigger change. I don't know if that will happen in my lifetime. I would like to think so, but who knows? Things are as crazy as I know.
What's interesting to me is I felt it when I was teaching, is I'll have 35 kids in each class. So through the day, I'm seeing 180 kids, and I'm working with each one of them, and I'm trying to make a difference. And there's no way for me to know if I made any difference. There's never any feedback. So you have to forge on believing you're making a difference.
Every once in a while, because I was taught now, and that was not my calling, if you will. I was a manufacturing engineer and in supply chain until I started my practice and somebody said, hey, you want to teach this college class? But every once in a while, a student comes back and says, you made a difference here. You helped me this. What you told me is this. I love it when they say, you know, I'm working here and I remembered you told us about this in class. And I'm like, yeah. So excuse my language in the church, but I'm not full of shit, right? I have a little bit, I wasn't just blowing smoke, you know? There are some things there. And somebody actually remembered that, and that makes my whole teaching thing worthwhile.
I just received an email yesterday from a former student who graduated a few years back and is now the head principal of a middle school in Des Moines, in the Des Moines area. And her email was, I want to do some work with my teachers on understanding data and improvement. Can you work with me to create lessons on PDSA? So that one person is now going to influence an entire building of teachers, and she'll have leverage over them. She can, you know, sometimes you do have to use your positional authority. But I was so enthused that she got a hold of me, you know, 4 years late after she finished and said, I want to do this with my teachers. So there are glimpses of hope. No panacea until my book comes out, but there are glimpses of hope.
I'll buy it, I'm buying it. I'm buying it.
Thank you, Doug.
Thanks, everybody. Enjoy. Take care.
You too. Enjoy your lunch or whatever mealtime it is where you are.
I will do that. Thanks. I'm going to leave the meeting. Bye, everybody.
Ciao.